Before Disney won the largest game of Hungry Hungry Hippos ever played and swallowed up not only Marvel, but eventually Fox as well, the mutants were kept apart from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's a no-brainer that the signature superheroes of Marvel will play a big role in the MCU going forward. But what will that role look like? While it seems like the Avengers are on top of the world, for the longest time Marvel's premier team of superheroes played second fiddle to their race of superheroes, an allegory for civil rights and other social woes, the Mutants. Headlining the mutant titles was Charles Xavier's X-Men. The hand-selected mutants meant to show the world that mutants could be friends with humans, even Wolverine. Well, maybe not friends exactly. The X-Men were the first franchise to make it to the big screen, and they've had their share of successes and failures along the way. Hugh Jackman has become inseparable from the character of Wolverine, appearing in 9 films over the course of 16 years, which turns out to be a world record. During that time, some classic X-Men stories have been revisited, from Days of Future Past to Dark Phoenix. Dark Phoenix even happened twice. It wasn't great either time. With 7 X-Men movies and 3 Wolverine movies since 2000, this creates an interesting situation for the Marvel Cinematic Universe now that they have the X-Men back in their fold. How can the MCU set itself apart from the mutant movies and TV shows that have come before it? With one notable exception, it's a lock that the characters will be recast, those that appear in both the MCU and the Fox mutant stories. There are some characters that are vital to the story of mutants that are almost certain to play some kind of role in the story of the mutants. Charles Xavier will always be the founder of the X-Men, and his perpetual frenemy Magneto will always be there to suggest that Xavier take a harder line with the humans. When it comes to the X-Men themselves, there has been more of a rotating cast of characters, with some playing key roles no matter who the supporting cast is. Will we see a new Jean Grey, Cyclops, Beast, Wolverine, and Nightcrawler? Well, only time will tell. There are certain characters that have been waiting in the wings for their moment, like the underutilized Gambit or Angel, or characters that haven't really appeared yet like Jubilee. One of the clues regarding integration can be seen in another character that might have suffered from franchise fatigue before he joined the MCU temporarily, and that's Spider-Man. When Sony and Disney reached their sharing agreement for the Wallcrawler, there had also been 2 franchises built around Spider-Man, including 2 different Green Goblins. Marvel's decision on how to incorporate Spider-Man into the fold might give us a clue as how the MCU might deal with the X-Men. The first rule was no origin story, since Spider-Man's origin story is one of the best known in comics. The second, however, is more applicable. Feige and the MCU made a decision to not repeat any villains and therefore stories. So far, the mutant stories that have made it to the big screen have centered around the amazing Chris Claremont era of mutant stories, primarily around the 80s and 90s with some borrowing here and there. When the mutants make their way to the MCU, there is another set of stories that they could draw from, and they're happening right now. The X-Men have gone through a lot of ups and downs with the regular people of the world, being both heroes and pariahs in equal measure and sometimes all at once. In the comic book version of Civil War, Wolverine was an Avenger at the time, but he was also followed around by a Sentinel just in case. Ask him how he felt about it. Not great is the answer. Not great. In fact, it was the kind of attitude that led to the mutants more or less sitting the Civil War out. Now people with powers that came from science or magic were being treated like people born with their powers, and they were more than willing to watch that play out from the sidelines. There has been one route to legitimacy that only the bad guys from Dr. Doom to Magneto and the terrorist organization Cobra have all tried at one point or another, in one way or another, and that's to form their own country. Who needs a secret base when you can have a capital and borders whose crossing can cause an international incident? Dr. Doom was lucky enough to come from a country where he had a claim to leadership. Latveria had its share of ups and downs, as one would expect when the country's monarch is also a supervillain. Cobra just raised up an island nation from the floor of the ocean, which proved more difficult than they imagined, but that's how most of Cobra's plans played out. Magneto has been trying to set up a sanctuary for mutants for a while in the island nation of Genosha, where he's had varying degrees of success. These days, however, the whole "I'm gonna make my own country where people are cool" game has been stepped up considerably, as both Charles Xavier and Magneto have come together to make a mutant homeland in the magical realm of Krakoa. Krakoa might just be the key to how mutants will play out in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Of course, first things first, the mutants have to make their way to the MCU. For that, all signs point towards something along the lines of the House of M storyline. In that storyline, the increasing power of Scarlet Witch starts to become a problem for, well, the entire universe. It's so much of a threat that a council of superpowered beings contemplates killing her to avoid any risk to reality. Unfortunately for them, her dad is Magneto, who hides her out in Genosha until she rewrites reality with the mutants in charge. Then she rewrites reality with no mutants, before she eventually rewrites reality back to normal-ish. From the story blurbs we've gotten from the Phase 4 MCU project so far, it seems clear that Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, is certainly going to have some problems reining in her power. If she uses it to bring back the love of her life in Vision, and thus creates a problem for reality that she and Doctor Strange have to solve, then the resolution of that could very well be the introduction of mutants into this world, either as a new thing or a thing that existed in a parallel reality that is now merged with the MCU. That gets the mutants here, but why would they skip over Genosha and go straight to Krakoa? Well, by all accounts, Krakoa is a much nicer place. Not that it's always been that way. Krakoa is a living island that was cut off from half of itself by Apocalypse some time ago, and at times has been an actual foe to the X-Men. But in the ongoing Dawn of X storyline, Professor X has had about enough of trying to get mutants and humans to get along, and has decided to tame the mutant land to become a mutant homeland. Recruiting his on-again, off-again friend with nation-building experience Magneto, together they've turned the Hive Mind Island into a sanctuary that even has a chief export in miracle drugs derived from the plants that grow on the island. Where the original X-Men storylines were centered on Xavier trying to create a spirit of coexistence, the Dawn of X storylines see a Professor X that has had enough and wants to take his ball and go home, so to speak. This creates a new world of mutants, quite literally, to tell the stories from, while still being familiar enough. Even the stuffy old school that's been at the center of so much of the X-Men story on the page and on the screen has made its way onto Krakoa. Like the secluded nation of Wakanda, Krakoa has several advantages that set it apart before you even get to the fact that everyone on the island has superpowers. The island is itself a hive mind, and plant life from the island planted elsewhere can allow communication and travel through the island. There are even resurrection pods to help streamline the no one stays dead principle in comics. With a race of people with superpowers living on an island that itself is a superpower, and more than a little resentment towards the rest of the world that fears them, that's a setup for conflict within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There isn't a way to establish the long history or frustration that Charles would have with humanity, but if the mutants are merged in from a different reality, they could be coming in knowing how this song plays out, so to speak, which encourages them to go straight to the island and have nothing to do with the outside world who would grow suspicious of them. This also means that mutant stories could happen in relative isolation, as they currently do in the regular Marvel Universe. The Marvel Cinematic Universe hasn't had the smoothest time dealing with parallel storylines that don't go directly through the movies. But that was when Marvel Entertainment ran the television projects and Marvel Studios ran the movies. Now everything goes through Feige, who might be able to run a separate mutant storyline, but for one big unifying reason, to set up a showdown, of course. If there's one thing that is certain as the X-Men joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's that the X-Men will also eventually face off against Earth's mightiest heroes. Sure, the Avengers team currently isn't what it used to be. Tony Stark made the big sacrifice, as did Black Widow. Clint Barton is more than likely passing the bow on to another generation. Steve Rogers went and got a life and is finally looking his age. Thor has hitched the ride into the universe. Of the original team, only the Hulk remains. There are new members to fill the ranks. Scarlet Witch obviously has her role to play in how things turn out. Doctor Strange could at the very least fill an advisory role. Technology and funding could come from the land of Wakanda and its king, the Black Panther. We don't know the fate of Spider-Man. Big old question mark. Whatever the Avengers team looks like, by the time that the mutants set up shop in Krakoa and start giving the finger to the rest of the world, they might become a bit concerned with the nation of superpowered beings who can revive themselves and are actively breeding more powerful mutants. If that sounds like a lot of story to build up, remember that the MCU went from some rich guy building a suit of armor in his garage in 2008 to saving literally half of all life in the universe from Thanos 11 years later on the course of 3 phases. Phase 4 will be about reordering the Marvel Cinematic Universe after the events of the Infinity Saga. Phase 5 will be bringing together the new Avengers, perhaps even young Avengers, as well as the X-Men, together with an eye towards the Avengers and X-Men coming to a head in Phase 6. At least that's what we got this covered as speculated. In the comics, the Avengers and the X-Men fought before. In the 2012 storyline, the X-Men and Avengers end up fighting over the Phoenix Force that seemed to be on its way bonded with Hope Summers. After 2 lackluster attempts at the Dark Phoenix story, it doesn't seem likely that the MCU will try that story again. Changing the motivation is not something that the MCU is afraid to do. There's another reason to think that the MCU might borrow from the current storyline, and that's the author himself. Jonathan Hickman is the writer currently writing the Dawn of X storyline. The MCU has already borrowed from Hickman's work for the end of the Infinity Saga, placing elements on his stories in both Infinity War and Endgame. With a track record like that, they're bound to get back to that well. Imagine an X-Men and Avengers fight that leaves things open for secret wars in the same way Civil War set the stage for Thanos' devastation, all without having to retell the old stories. Yeah, it's gonna be a fun couple years. That's the role that the X-Men could play in the MCU. Let us know what you'd like to see in the comments, and while you're there, why not subscribe to CBR and hit that notification button? You won't get your own nation, but you will get the latest videos in your inbox. Thanks for watching.